Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being at AtAmerica at this event, which is co-hosted by USINDO, the US-Indonesia Society, and the American Chamber of Commerce in Indonesia. It's great to see such a good big turnout for a very important opportunity for us all to hear directly from the highest ranking officer in the United States Navy. So this is quite an honor for us. In brief introductory remarks, I just want to say that Admiral John M. Richardson is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. He has a long and distinguished academic resume. The thing that most people mention is that he spent the bulk of his career in submarines. So I've always found submarines particularly exciting part of things, although it might get a little claustrophobic. But the real deal, and the only thing you really need to say, we agreed backstage, is that Admiral Richardson is the chief of U.S. Naval Operations, and it really doesn't get any higher than that. So I'm very honored to be here. I'm going to ask Admiral Richardson to come to the stage, and we will have an opportunity to take some questions and answers after the remarks by the Admiral. Admiral?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Lynn, thank you for that very kind introduction. And I got to say, it's a very cool place. You know, it's a great venue, everybody in the stadium seating. And they said this is, one of the more cutting-edge happening places to come and speak, and I've got to agree. So thank you all for having me. This is my first trip to Indonesia, and I've got to say Jakarta has a vibrancy that's evident, undeniable, immediately upon touchdown. And so it's just a real pleasure to be here. I want to also thank Hazel and US-Indo for hosting us here. And so, it's, as I said, it's a pleasure. Before I go any further in my remarks, I do want to take a moment and just offer my condolences for the tragedy of Lion Air. And I just want to ensure that our thoughts and prayers are with those who perished on the airline, and we pray that their families can find consolation quickly. We also keep in our thoughts all of those responders who are out there working so hard to mitigate this tragedy. And so I just wanted to take a moment and recognize that. And it's a privilege to represent about the 600,000 members of the United States Navy. And if there's just something the reason we're here is to affirm our commitment to the strategic partnership between Indonesia and the United States. And I started my visit by paying a visit out to Admiral Siwi, the chief of the Indonesian Navy, in his headquarters in Cilangkap. And we both agreed during that visit to continue to deepen our Navy-to-Navy relationship, a relationship that's already strong, and deepen it still further with more interoperability and more bilateral and multilateral training at sea. And the foundation of this partnership runs very deep. The roots are very deep, to the very core of who we are as a people and as two nations. We are both democracies, both large democracies, and we both have large economies, world-class economies that have global impact. And furthermore, those economies are both fueled by the sea. We're both maritime nations with a common outlook on the importance of the sea. And the United States and the United States Navy is committed to this strategic partnership as we continue to sail together as we have for many years. In fact, very proud that the United States and Indonesia are about to recognize the 70th anniversary of our relationship, a landmark in 1949 as we recognized Indonesia as the landmark for both of our countries. Well, I'm also very conscious that we're here on the host nation for ASEAN. And we recognize the absolutely fundamental and critical role of ASEAN, a constellation of partners promoting security and order and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. And so it's very exciting to be here. You know, I recently hosted in Newport, Rhode Island, the International Sea Power Symposium, the 23rd episode of that. And during that, we have about, well, over 100 navies and coast guards that are represented there in our Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. And the Indonesian Navy was there, of course. And it was a valuable chance to talk about our strategic partnership in the context of that global maritime community. And in the context, you know, the framework for that symposium was the idea of security, order, and prosperity on the seas and oceans. And I see this visit to Indonesia as really just a continuation of that discussion. A chance to advocate for the rules-based international order that underpins the global maritime economy that is critical to both Indonesia and the United States. And I think that when we get the opportunity to pause and recognize that, we should do so. You know, like the United States, as I said, Indonesia is clearly a maritime nation, the world's largest archipelago, over 17,000 islands. A tremendous portion of the Indonesian economy comes from the maritime sector. You're here, you know, right next to the Straits of Malacca. Your imports and exports, your trade, almost all of it travels by sea. It's very similar to the United States. And you're here on the borders of the South China Sea, where over $5 trillion in trade and 50% of the world's oil travels by sea. Indonesia possesses the world's richest maritime biodiversity, and it relies on sea lanes to connect it to the world, and even, or maybe just as important, to connect the thousands of islands of Indonesia to one another. And I would argue that we are embarking in a maritime era. You hear about this in many different ways, the blue century, the blue economy. And so looking forward, and we're going to be increasingly dependent upon the seas for our prosperity. And I thought it might be useful just to think about some of the dynamic maneuvering that is going on in the seas as we speak. And it's interesting to remark that although people have been going to sea in ships for about 6,000 years, is a safe estimate, all right, thousands and thousands of years, the amount of traffic, the amount of shipping on the seas has increased by a factor of 4. It has quadrupled in the last quarter century. Really almost a spike. If you can imagine, you know, going 6,000 years and then in 25 years, quadrupling, 400% increase. And this traffic, this maritime traffic accounts for 90% of all international trade that travels by sea. And so it should be no surprise to anybody in Indonesia, in fact, anyone in this region of the world, that this maritime traffic, this maritime trade has fueled prosperity around the world. The global GDP has roughly doubled in the same period of time, and Indonesia has also profited by that. The Indonesian economy has increased by about 250% in the last 25 years, fueled by this increase in maritime activity. And at the same time, you know, while we can talk about shipping, there's much more changing in the maritime domain. The global information system is something that's sprung upon us. A brand new, you know, information fuels everything, right? And this, again, ties us to the sea. 99% of all the international internet traffic flows on undersea cables, okay? And so we talk about the cloud, and you think about a cloud, you look up, But the fact of the matter is all the information is on the seafloor, right? And so we should be looking down into the depths. And it's also interesting to note that if that traffic gets interrupted by whatever reason, it cannot be reconstituted in the electromagnetic domain. Only about 3% can be reconstituted by satellites and radios. And so this infrastructure on the seafloor that carries our information is extremely important. Seas also on the seafloor is becoming increasingly possible to reach the resources, the natural resources, further and further out to sea. The amount of oil platforms, natural gas platforms, those sorts of features have doubled in the last 25 years, from about 3,000 to 6,000. The amount of protein and carbohydrate that we get from the sea, the amount of food that we get from the sea has increased. In fact, you don't even have to go back 25 years for this. The amount of fish that we consume as people for food has increased by about 20% in the last 5 years alone, amounting to about 150 million tons of fish each year. And so you can see in the last 25 years, and picking up speed, the oceans have been a very, very dynamic, rapidly changing place and have brought prosperity to millions. And looking forward, it will be more of the same. In fact, the pace will probably pick up. If you think about the concept of a megacity, and it's not hard to think about here in Jakarta being a megacity. There's about 30 to 31 megacities in the world right now. And in the next 10 years or so, that number is expected to grow to 41 or so, right? Those are the projections. And like Jakarta, most of those megacities will be near the sea, okay? And so it's, again, there's this coupling between our population and the oceans, and that's undeniable. In fact, President Jokowi has highlighted this even today in Bali at the Oceans Forum, highlighting that he sees his goal is to make Indonesia a major maritime power. And so there's a wide recognition of this movement going forward. And they think these facts that we just reviewed clearly demonstrate that nations across the world and their citizens have enjoyed an extended and almost unprecedented period of prosperity, again, fueled in many ways by the sea. There's much work yet to be done, of course, but billions of people around the world have benefited from the international order, the rules-based global commons that have lifted literally billions of people out of poverty. This order governs aspects of our diplomatic, economic, and military interests. And the conditions arising from this order have created that sense of stability and predictability that will lead to prosperity. But nations can only devote resources to fostering order on the seas that order that fuels prosperity if the seas themselves are a place of security. These are a secure place. Secure seas shift our global mindset where the citizens of the world consider the seas not as a competitive space filled with danger, but as a place of opportunity. And to establish security and create a sense of order that allows everyone to prosper, this job is bigger than any one nation. And so it leads you to a sense, to a necessity to form meaningful partnerships. Nations joining together in a common effort to represent the strongest, most productive approach to promoting security. No nation in this environment can succeed on their own. And as the head of a Navy, I might be accused of being a bit biased, but I would say that Navy-to-Navy relationships are a very effective, perhaps the most effective way to strengthen nation-to-nation ties. If you think about what you can do with a Navy-to-Navy partnership, first we go out to sea together. We're in international waters much of the time, and so there aren't sovereignty concerns. We can go out there and just start working together. And as sailors, and during those operations, exercises, as we work together, this is meaningful work. It takes planning, it takes communications, it takes exchanges of people, exchanges of information, and then of course you have to operate together. And so this is real partnership building type of activity. And furthermore, as sailors, we share a deep cultural background, the knowledge and the love and the respect for what the sea can do to us, and appreciation for what the sea can provide for us. This has never been more true than today. And that shared understanding, the influence of the sea we share, can withstand wind and weather. As the winds blow, strong Navy-to-Navy relationships serve as a strong keel for the ship of state, allowing the other elements of national power, the political, the diplomatic, the economic, cultural, and social dimensions, to exercise with vibrancy and do their thing on a keel of stability. But these partnerships do take work. You have to invest. They take practice. And it requires us first to establish some sort of common vision, to find some common ground, to be creative, to communicate our intentions clearly and continually. And it requires us to adapt with our partners as the geopolitical situation around us changes. And this is legitimate work that requires us to openly and transparently share information, lessons learned, and best practices, so that we can all operate together safely and effectively and productively. And I would argue that military-to-military relations enhance and strengthen the bonds among nations when they're done properly. And the United States has been long committed to establishing this sense of security on, below, and above the seas. And is the reason that the United States Navy deploys around the world, exercising with and operating alongside our partners, just like Indonesia. Now, the span of challenges that we face as partners is large, from disaster relief and protection of economic resources to confronting high-end security threats. But this also means that the span of opportunity for our countries is large. The potential exists, the potential that exists for the United States and Indonesia to work together is really, I think, only just beginning to be realized. We have a strong history of cooperation. We're dedicated to deepening and strengthening that cooperation and more fully realizing the potential that exists to work together. When tragedy struck with the earthquake and tsunami in Sulawesi in September of the 28th, the Indonesian Navy leadership sprung into action, and I called up my counterpart during that time, and we provided assistance during that time as well. We'll continue to stand with the Indonesian people through what will be a long-term recovery. But we don't have to wait for disasters to strike to work together. This cooperation occurs nearly every day all over the Indo-Pacific region. These deployed forces, the United States Navy operating around the world, are working in many ways with Indonesia. Earlier this year, the United States and Indonesia worked to enhance interoperability for humanitarian assistance, to practice at getting better at that, disaster relief during Pacific Partnership 2018. We're committed to continue devoting the energy through these exercises, working together to deepen the bonds of trust and confidence between our navies and our nations and our people to better respond to natural disasters in the future. We have a long history of partnership with respect to information sharing to better understand the ocean environment. And our partnership is not limited to disaster relief and economic cooperation, we are also committed to deepening our security partnership. And Indonesia maintains a robust schedule of naval exercises. In fact, this year, Indonesia participated with the United States and 23 other nations in the world's largest international maritime exercise, RIMPAC. The deployment of the Indonesian Navy ships Makassar and Martadinata demonstrate Indonesia's commitment to build trust and confidence with international partners practicing for the most sophisticated types of maritime warfare. And in addition to this signature exercise, our countries participate in a host of other bilateral and multilateral exercises. This year's Carrot Indonesia exercise marked the first between the U.S. Navy and the Indonesia's Navy newly designated First Fleet. We also sail with each other during Southeast Asia cooperation and training with a dozen regional navies and in the multinational naval exercise Komodo. And as the saying goes, iron sharpens iron. Exercising, working together, steaming together makes both of us stronger. We learn together through port calls, personnel exchanges, attending each other's schools, and in so many other ways, deepening the bonds of trust and confidence that enable a strong partnership. Beyond the many ways that we operate bilaterally, Indonesia demonstrates a very visible multilateral commitment to security, order, and prosperity as well. And as I mentioned earlier, as we are sitting here today, Indonesia and Bali are on the global stage hosting the 5th Open Ocean Conference. The theme, Our Oceans, Our Legacy, could not be more timely. Indonesia's rich maritime marine biodiversity is a national treasure. Its existence benefits all people around the globe. Continuing dialogue on fisheries, scientific research, and the long-term stability of the oceans and their abundant resources could not be more important. The U.S. Navy team is in Bali as well, attending, and I look forward to their insights when they return from the conference. As a founding member, and by providing the geographic home for ASEAN, Indonesia also demonstrates a very visible commitment to partnerships that support security, order, and prosperity. As an organization whose charter is dedicated to accelerating economic growth and promoting regional peace and stability, ASEAN exemplifies a team approach. Indonesia's dedication to ASEAN also reflects respect and support for rules-based institutions. The United States is dedicated to working with Indonesia and the other nations of ASEAN when and where we can to promote a safe and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. So I'll wrap it up because I think the most important part or the most interesting part of our conversation will be the questions and answers. But I think that after just stimulating some thought on the maritime century in which we live and the maritime economy on which we all depend, and after considering the ways in which our two navies collaborate, we can safely conclude that there's strong momentum carrying us forward towards a deeper partnership. And that partnership is critical because the system which enables our prosperity, the constellation of partnerships, the rules-based international order that provides for a global commons did not appear overnight. It was created carefully, deliberately, and was the work of many nations, Indonesia and the United States among them, over many years. And safeguarding it requires diligence and vigilance. And we'll continue sailing alongside Indonesia and any nation that seeks a maritime environment that is secure, orderly, and prosperous for all. So thank you again for US-Indo for hosting the event. Thank you to Admiral Siwi and the Indonesian Navy for their partnership and their very gracious hospitality, to the Indonesian people for your opening your doors and here in Jakarta. I would just say in closing, terima kasih, selamat sore. Thank you.
Admiral Richardson, thank you very, very much. I'll invite you to take a seat and relax a little bit.
It's very
now,
relaxing.
It's relaxed. It's nice. These are good chairs, actually. I enjoy sitting in these chairs. We'll take, we have time for, in fact, we have we have a considerable amount of time for some questions and answers. So what I would ask is that you raise your hands, and then I will ask you to please. Oh, we got a bunch of questions already. I'm going to start on this side of the room. We'll take one question, one answer, and see if we can get through it. I see a lady, and please identify yourself and your organization if that's applicable. Lady in the, is that leopard?
Yes. Thank you very much. Admiral, it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm Jana Diakawati from Indonesia Defense University. I have a lot of questions actually, but I'll just give you one question.
Okay.
Could you please explain more about the decision for the U.S. Navy for having, well, not U.S. Navy, sorry, from the U.S. PACOM into the US-Indo PACOM? Honestly, there's not much being talked around, but what is the strategic implications of it, and how should also the Indonesia, especially the Indonesian Navy, could see this as an opportunity to, as you said, strengthen and expand Navy-to-Navy relations? Thank you.
Right, yeah. Well, I think it's a very good question, and I would say that of any people that I could think of who would understand this intrinsically in their DNA, it would be the people of Indonesia who almost literally sit on the pivot between the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. And so with respect to the command itself and what responsibilities are in their portfolio, really absolutely nothing changed. I mean, they've always had those responsibilities, so their portfolio didn't change a whole lot. But what did change was, I think, the need to highlight that portion of their portfolio that had gone silent up to the day. So, as you know, as the Pacific Command before, now I think with the realization that there is great importance in the Indian Ocean and in that region of the world, and particularly here in the system that couples the two, Strait of Malacca and all of that. I think that was really the driving force behind the change, is to recognize that there's more to this command and more to this global dynamic than just the Pacific alone.
Raise your hand. I'm going to take one more up here. I see a gentleman. You look so excited. I'm Yuri right there in the batik.
Well, thank you, sir. My name is Budi. I'm from Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much for your very brief explanations about the topic. Well, my question is about, I'd like to ask your clarifications on the title of the topic today, which is mentioned about the allies and partners, US-Indonesia Navy cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. As far as I'm concerned, Indonesia currently is promoting a concept of regarding Indo-Pacific discourse, which is anchored in the principle of inclusiveness and promotion of cooperation and dialogue, the habit of dialogue, as well as the respect of to international law. And it is also mentioned by President and also our Foreign Minister in ASEAN summits this year. And we also recognize that there are several kinds of concepts or approaches that also developed by other countries in the region. Now, what we are going to see is that actually how those concepts developed by other countries can have common ground, not serving the interests of specific countries, that can we work together to achieve what you mentioned as our shared interest, which is stability and then prosperity in the region. So my question is, could you please clarify the title of our discussions today on this allies and partners of US-Indonesia naval cooperation?
All right, no, I didn't pay too much attention to the title.
I must have it here someplace.
Yeah,
Allies and partners.
Yeah. I'm not sure I understand the question. You almost answered it yourself with your prolific preface there. And so I think that we see it very much the same way. The strategy is a free and open Indo-Pacific, founded on the rules-based order that has fueled the prosperity and the growth of the entire world for the last 70 years, but particularly the nations in Southeast Asia. And so I think we're very much together on the conceptual approach to the future, an approach that provides a level playing field for all to prosper, an approach that respects sovereignty, an approach that would object to any kind of coercive type of techniques to manifest themselves. And so I think that we're very much aligned with the principles that you articulated before you asked your question.
And if I may, Budi, and Admiral, if I could jump in, I wouldn't react too much to the word allies. I know that ally applies alliance, which is something Indonesia does not form in a military sense, that its foreign policy has been like this for a long, long time. I don't think by the title of the talk does not imply building any kind of a formal alliance.
No, not at all.
So I wanted to clarify that point because
it's allies and partners, right? So
yes.
we do that on purpose.
I'm gonna jump over here. I'm gonna take this lady right here, in the white dress with the black glasses. There we go.
So, okay. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Agnes Anya from the Jakarta Post newspaper. I have questions related to Indo-Pacific as well. Like Mas Budi has mentioned that our Indo-Pacific, Indonesia's and Indo-Pacific concept is inclusive, meaning that we can also include China in it. And how you see our Indonesia's Indo-Pacific in relation to Navy relationship. And the second question, in regards to Indo-Pacific and from US in Indonesia, is there any plan to cooperate more to enhance our ties in regards to Indo-Pacific? Yeah, like that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, I think that just as I said in the answering the last question, our concept is inclusive, but it's inclusive in a way that maintains that inclusivity going forward, right? And so it's certainly open to all nations, provided that this rules-based order that has allowed all of that prosperity to happen, allowed freedom of navigation, et cetera, is also maintained. And so this is, I think, our approach to, it's this free and open type of concept, right? And so the international law that governs traffic on the seas, we'll continue to advocate for that. And could you just maybe give me a hint on the second part of your question again? Oh, well, yeah, so this was my reason. So the question was any plans to enhance or strengthen our partnership, and with regard to what? The Indo-Pacific Command? Yeah. Well, yeah, and so that would, in the Navy-to-Navy context, that would be manifested through not only Indo-Pacific Command, but also the Pacific Fleet, the 7th Fleet. And so there is, as I said, a very strong relationship there. We'll continue to work with Admiral Siwi and his team to look for opportunities to make that stronger at a pace that's very comfortable and cooperative with the Indonesian Navy.
Okay, I'm going to take one more. I see a gentleman in the middle there in a blue batik. I'll get to as many people as I can. Take two here and then two over here again, then we'll back here.
Okay, good afternoon, Admiral. I hope you're enjoying your stay in Indonesia so far. First off, I just want to say...
Could you please identify yourself and who you're with?
Oh, yes, of course. My name is Choi, and I am from the University of Pelita Harapan, currently majoring in international relations. First off, I just want to say I have a huge respect for the military around the world, regardless of the nation that they serve. So thank you so much for your service, not just to you, but for all the military personnel in this room. Now, moving on to my question, you highlighted about the importance of the Navy-to-Navy partnership between Indonesia and the United States. So could you elaborate more on the kind of role that the United States Navy has in the South China Sea conflict, in how the United States Navy can do to tackle this security issue? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I am enjoying my time in Indonesia a great deal. And beyond that, I'm going to have to sort of deconstruct your question a little bit because I don't see any conflict in the South China Sea. And so I don't know how to answer your question. I think that we're all seeking for ways forward that really allow us to strengthen those areas where we have common interests, all of the neighbors in this region, and then certainly recognize that there are areas where we have differing interests, but we would want to resolve those interests to come to some kind of an understanding in a manner that does everything to avoid conflict, right? And so this is really the approach going forward. And so there are the partnership that we might have with all the navies in the region, including the Indonesian Navy, would be to advocate for those ways of reducing tension, reducing risk as we continue to work through our differences.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to go over here. I see a gentleman here in a blue shirt, and then I'll take somebody up top, right here in the middle.
Okay, thank you. I'm Lieutenant Commander Harry from Seskwal, Indonesian Naval Staff College. Here I want to ask you about, you know that Indonesia conduct, especially Indonesian Navy conduct joint or combined patrol in Sulu Sea with Philippines and Malaysia. So I just want to ask you, what is your opinion about this joint patrol? And then what is your suggestion for Indonesian Navy, especially to secure our sea and also for Indonesian big waters that we have? So what is your opinion and your suggestion? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think that that's a very good example of a maritime security arrangement that might get after the challenges in the Sulu Sea, you know, amongst partners that all have a claim for a peaceful resolution of those sorts of challenges. And so, you know, there's a number of challenges in that part of the world, kidnapping, you know, illegal trafficking, all those sorts of things. And as I said in my remarks, sometimes you know, these seas can be so vast, right, that it's bigger than any one nation can take on themselves. And so these cooperative partnerships allow for some burden sharing, I suppose, or cooperation where there are mutual interests to be had and strengthened. And so I think that that arrangement, that trilateral arrangement in the Sulu Sea is a good example of that. You know, as I was talking to Admiral Siwi today, I was just trying to convey my deep respect for the mission and the proficiency of the Indonesian Navy and all of the maritime security arms here that have a tremendous mission to try and maintain security in a vast, exclusive economic zone with, you know, tens of thousands of islands. It's a mission that boggles your mind when you think about it. And so from one chief of Navy to another, I've got nothing but respect for the Indonesian Navy and the way that they carry out their mission.
Okay, the gentleman right there in the blue shirt, right in the middle. Right there. There we go.
Hi there. My name is Chico Hakim. I'm a social and political analyst and activist, businessman sometimes. I'm also a founder of Innovator for Indonesia. It's a group of Indonesians graduated from top 100 schools in the world, and we are concerned about the fourth industrial revolution. So
the fourth what?
Industrial revolution.
Okay, yeah.
The big data, artificial intelligence era.
Information revolution, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, information, maybe military too. So my question would be related to that. What kind of new naval products or military products and equipments from the United States that has big data and artificial intelligence
Right.
related?
No, it's a very good question. Yeah.
Yes, and and a new set of skills of your Navy officers, of course. You should have new set of skills. Would you be transferring the knowledge to the Indonesian Navy officers on that?
Well, we have a great knowledge transfer. Okay, I'm sorry, you're not done
And
yet.
one more?
Yeah.
Can
But
you-
wait, there's more.
Okay. No, just one more. The last one is just tell if you can, tell us a specific product or equipment that is
Right.
related to that.
Yeah. Well, let me start, and I'll work my way backwards to the question that I can't answer, okay? And so certainly we have a terrific knowledge exchange between our two navies. And we had a chance to reflect on that this morning during my visit to the Indonesian Navy headquarters, where we had a chance to appreciate the great exchange of officers, attending each other's schools. And I think that these are strategic partnerships, right? These junior officers go to school together, they learn together, they operate together, and then they grow up and they become more senior and they lead their navies together. And these bonds of trust that you form early in a career, they allow us to team together much more effectively and quickly. That we operate at the speed of trust when you form these partnerships, and so it's extremely important that we do this knowledge exchanges. I would say that with respect to your question about technology, no Navy, no organization in the world is immune or can be excused from this revolution that's happening. We do so at our own peril, right? We become vulnerable to disruption. And so I think as many companies, organizations are doing, so is the United States Navy, so are other navies that I collaborate with. We are looking to move forward in these areas that adopt artificial intelligence, that adopt machine learning, that adopt everything that information technologies, advanced computing power, all of those opportunities open up things. And you alluded that it might have an implication or an impact on our personnel systems, and I agree with you 100%, right? And so we have to be thinking forward to make sure that we are not training people for a job that is going to be replaced by some autonomous technology and render people better suited for other tasks, right? And so all of this is, as you know better than I, because you think about it harder than I do, very complicated. This very complicated ecosystem, the changing relationship between humanity and technology, between the human mind and the mind in the computational power of a computer. And so I think that we're moving forward into this space as aggressively as possible. And finally, to the question that I can't answer is about the specifics. What sort of magic system we've got. And of course, if I told you, it wouldn't be magic anymore. And so I'll hold back on that.
So we'll have to wait for the Admiral's next visit to get the secret plans. Take this woman right here.
Thanks, Admiral, for being with us. I'm Fanny Potkin from Reuters. My question was regarding the the Chinese destroyer coming very, very close to the U.S. decatur last month. If you had any comments on what the Navy thinks and what you do in the future.
Right. I will tell you that, as I pointed out in my remarks, it's gotten very busy at sea, right? Maritime traffic in general increasing 400% in the last 25 years. And I'll tell you, the People's Liberation Army Navy has grown as well, right? Grown in numbers and grown in capability. And we continue to operate in the South China Sea as we have for the last 70 years, and we're going to continue to operate going forward. And so what that means is that we're going to be in each other's company. We're going to meet each other on the high seas more frequently. What we have in place to manage that is a operational arrangement we call CUES, which is a acronym for the Code for Unplanned Encounters at Sea. And it's a operational construct, as I said, an arrangement that allows us to meet each other on the high seas and conduct ourselves in a way that minimizes risk, particularly the risk of miscalculation. And so what we saw, I think, in that one particular episode is a departure from that operational arrangement that allows us to operate with minimal risk. And we would certainly advocate that that type of behavior not be a dimension of our future.
Okay, the gentleman in the red batik has.
Thank you, Admiral. My name is Edi Alimin. I'm from PT Ambanyu, a consultant engineering company. I'm honored I finally can ask this question directly to U.S. Chief Naval Operation. About strategic partnership, I'm an engineer, so I would like to question in strategic partnership in technical and engineering that will contribute to peace and security. That my first question. My second question about inter-operational ability. There are nations in Southeast Asia that use not Western-based equipment system, including Indonesia. Even in the future, I will see that it will kind of continue. How do you address this inter-operational ability in operation, I mean, in the field? Thank you very much.
Okay. Let me see if I can rephrase the question back to you to make sure I understand it properly. So you're an engineer, and you're talking about the technological interoperability. Is that what? Yeah. And so there's a number of ways to do that. And I would say that this, going back to the earlier question, the idea of this new revolution, the information age, or however you want to characterize that, allows us actually to achieve a lot more potential for collaborating effectively. And what we've seen is that in these maritime arrangements and maritime partnerships, coalitions at sea, what we find is that depending upon a particular nation's Navy capabilities, there's a full spectrum of capabilities that a coalition may bring. Some navies can bring some very sophisticated capability. Some navies, maybe not so much sophistication. But these information technologies allow us all to come together in I would say, an optimum arrangement so that each element of that coalition, formed by several different navies perhaps, which would bring not only a spectrum of capabilities, technical capabilities, but also policy capabilities, policy restrictions, et cetera. And these information technologies allow us to all find our place in a spectrum so that the team approach is optimized to deliver the maximum maritime security for the team. And so I think that there's tremendous opportunity there, and it's fueled by some of these new technologies that are coming over the horizon.
Okay.
So your second question, I didn't quite understand.
Partnership in technology and engineering that will contribute to security. How do you see the future between, let's say, US?
So you're talking about systems that are non-lethal?
Both. Not lethal or perhaps lethal.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're talking about strategic partnership.
Yeah.
Since I'm an engineering, so I want to see partnership in technical and engineering issue. How do you see it in the future?
Well, I think again, it's an entangled ecosystem, right? And so there's an awful lot of opportunity to exchange technology. Generally, a lot of the technology is governed by an information exchange agreement, which we've got in place between the United States and Indonesia. And then, of course, Indonesia has a perspective on this as well, in terms of how they want to be, globally approach their future. And so, it's the intersection of all those things. It's not the technology that's the crux of the issue. It's generally sort of the arrangements and the agreements that allow, that govern what we exchange. Okay.
Okay, we're back over to this side of the room. I'm going to take another gentleman in uniform there. That would be you, sir. And then I saw some hands up above. So.
Thank you. My name is Tantara, Major Marine Corps. I come from Naval Staff and Command. My question is, Chief, there's recently a large scale of exercise between Russia and China. In this case, what it is in fact to our relationship, it is make a big concern to American policy. And the second question is about this development of US PACOM. Is the Fifth Fleet is jointly effective to the US PACOM? Thank you.
Okay, so your first question about cooperation between Russia and China and what that means to the region.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, and so this is sort of an emerging relationship, I would say relatively just beginning and not too mature yet. And so we'll see how it develops. It's difficult to project into the future, but it's a new dynamic that I think bears close watching. And so I think all of us will pay close attention. The second part of your question was what?
The Fifth Fleet from Bahrain is jointly effective to the US PACOM.
Oh, the Fifth Fleet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not joined US-Indo PACOM. Fifth Fleet works for U.S. Naval Central NavCent, so U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, and so it's aligned to a different combatant commander.
Okay, Chief. So it is still the Seventh Fleet and the Third Fleet.
Third Fleet and Seventh Fleet.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, as I said, nothing really changed in terms of their responsibilities.
Thank you.
We didn't get an extra fleet yet. All the way up to the top there.
We actually did get the Second Fleet.
Oh, we got the second
It's not Indo-PACOM, so.
Where's the second?
It's in the Atlantic. It's in Norfolk, Virginia.
I didn't even know there was.
That other ocean.
Thank you, Admiral. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Frege Wenas from Indonesian Defense University. I actually have two short questions. You mentioned about the key importance of ASEAN in the context of US-Indonesia in the Pacific. I noticed that there has been a recent event which involved the defense minister, even from the US, organized by the ASEAN, namely ADMM Plus. And there's also a similar event at the Chief of Navy level, which actually is being participated by the ASEAN countries. Do you think that there is a possibility in the future for the US to propose the engagement of the dialogue partners of ASEAN as demonstrated at the ADMM Plus? And the second question regarding the recent, the first maritime joint exercise between ASEAN and China about a week ago. What do you think of this event? Do you think that there would be a, you mentioned that there would be an opportunity of cooperation. Maybe you can offer between China and the US, these two countries cooperate with the ASEAN countries, organize a similar event in the future.
Well, with respect, let me just comment generally on ASEAN, and I hope I made it clear in my remarks that with respect to the maritime, and I think the general future of this region, ASEAN going to play a pivotal role, right? A central, a cornerstone type of a role in the future of the region. And so, an ASEAN-led future is something that I think would benefit everybody. With respect to ASEAN's relationship with, different partners who are not members of ASEAN proper, you mentioned this maritime exercise between ASEAN and China. I think at the recent meeting, there was also an agreement to do one in 2019 between ASEAN and the United States Navy. And so it is sort of a very nice and balanced approach that ASEAN is taking. I think that these sorts of balanced approaches do provide opportunity for us to find areas of cooperation. And so we'll just have to see how it bears out in the future. But so far, the centrality, the cornerstone role that ASEAN is playing, I think, is a solid trend for the future.
I go over here, gentleman in the check shirt, right here.
Good afternoon, Admiral. My name is Edward Gustley. I'm with Penita Capital based here in Jakarta. What I'd like to know is what lessons do you feel you've learned from the two incidences in the Sea of Japan and also Singapore, where the naval fleet had run-ins with the private sector, if you will, of ships? Thank you.
Well, I think the major lesson is that you've got to, even in a very highly demanding operational environment, that you have got to make sure that you continue to invest in training and certification of forces, because over time, it's just the assumption that continuing to operate will provide those sorts of skills. That assumption doesn't hold, and so we've really, sort of backed up a little bit, taken a hard look at ourselves, and reinvested and reinstilled that discipline that will ensure that we do the requisite training and certification before we go out and on our missions.
Okay, there's a woman in a striped shirt who's been raising her hand continuously for the last half hour.
Finally, thank you for taking my question. My question will be,
And could you?
yeah. I'm Aziza from Antara News Agency.
I knew you were a journalist.
Yes.
That was obvious.
So my question will be, you mentioned in your remarks that the key for challenge to secure the partnership in the sea is to establish a common ground to communicate clearly and continually. So as improving relation between U.S. and North Korea after meeting of President Trump and Kim Jong-un last June, did you also, the U.S. Navy also build communication with your counterpart in North Korea? And how to some of the joint exercise between the U.S. and South Korea is taken as a threat for the North Korea. How to bridge this in terms of strengthen the Navy to Navy relation. My second question will be
That's a pretty big question all by itself.
about North Korea and South Korea. To follow up the student from Pelita Harapan, it is very interesting that you don't see any conflict in the South China Sea. Is that the general point of view of the U.S. Naval, or you personally as a chief of the operation of Naval? Because some tensions are actually happening around the South China Sea. And
we're out of time.
Yes,
I think
all.
we all know
Thank
what
you
goes
very
on in the
much.
South China Sea. We'll give you a chance to settle the problems in Korea and in the South China Sea.
Yeah.
You got 2 minutes.
Okay. And I think I'll have some time left over to do global warming. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good choice.
Yeah. I think, well, our approach to the negotiations with respect to North Korea, this is, of course, a diplomatically led effort right now, okay? And so it's important to make sure that the primary focus for that effort remains on diplomacy. We want to make sure in the security space, including the Navy, that we provide a position of strength from which our diplomats and the economic element of this negotiation can stand, okay? And so I think that's really about as much as I want to say about that, because it is, I don't want to distort this. This is a diplomatic and economic effort primarily. We provide support to that effort. And with respect to the dynamic in the South China Sea, I'm not saying that there's no tension, and I'm not trying to give you the impression that I'm blind to what is going on, but I don't think that I would characterize it as rising to a state where I would call it conflict, right? And so competition, certainly, and there are new dynamics to that coercion, perhaps, but we want to make sure that we can manage these things through techniques that would not escalate, right, to a level of conflict, do this all as peacefully as possible while we negotiate our differences.
We are almost out of time, and I think we can take one more question. This gentleman right here in the batik, in the brown batik. This is one of those rare and very pleasant moments when you're moderating something and everybody wants to ask a question.
My name is Bintang Sitompul from US Alumni Association. General Marshall? Sorry, General Richardson, sorry.
Admiral.
Admiral Richardson.
Wrong service.
All right. I'm sorry about that. I'm noted that around this Southeast Asian region, there are 13 US military bases. Correct me if I'm wrong. But during your presentation, you mentioned that this meeting today is how do we strengthen our relationship between Indonesia and America. So I think this 13 is too much, General. I noted from Subic Bay,
Admiral.
in Cocos, Christmas Island, Singapore. Just from my deepest, from a humble understanding, is that to strengthen the relationship with the 13 military bases surrounded close by this nation? Thank you very much, sir.
Well, thank you very much for your opinion.
I think we'll move on to the next question, maybe over here. There's a gentleman in the back in a white shirt wearing a tie. That would be you. And we literally are out of time. This will be the last question, I'm afraid.
My name is Agung Jawardana. I'm from Spire Research and Consulting. So my question will be, first, how do you see partnership between US Navy and Indonesia in the future? And how do you see maritime industry in US, especially your focus, for instance? And what is your opinion about the trade war and the impact to maritime industry, especially in terms of shipping and logistics? Thank you.
Okay, well, we've, if you accept the thesis that this is a maritime century, a blue economy, if you will, then I think that places a tremendous import to the shipping industry. You know, a vibrant part of the economy of this region is the shipbuilding industry. And as we think about the United States meeting its responsibilities to continue to prosper in this maritime economy, then I think that there are several opportunities for sort of a domestic shipbuilding industry as well. We'll have to see how that all happens. You know, in the United States Navy, we certainly have our industrial partners that build ships for the Navy. Beyond that, you know, we'll just have to see how it goes. Okay.
Okay, with that, we have actually run out of time. I know that other people have questions. It struck me as we were talking that it really is quite an honor and a privilege to have this opportunity to talk to the Chief of Naval Operations of the United States. This is not something that happens every day. And I think, speaking on behalf of our partners at USINDO, AmCham, and AtAmerica, and the audience, I think let's give Admiral Richardson a great big round of applause.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And the last piece of business is just to ask Admiral Marsetio, Admiral Amarula, Greg Adams, and Hazel to come up so we can do the ceremonial photograph.
And as we're doing that, I just want to compliment you all. It's been a fantastic opportunity for me to have a dialogue with you. I got to say that the level of questions, the sophistication of the questions is outstanding. So you should give yourselves a round of applause for just being a terrific audience.